Okay, today we're going to go ahead and finish this project up. So I'm just going to finish my design, add some gradients, and then a shadow underneath. So to finish up my design, I'm going to change the opacity of all of these objects so that I can see through them, so I can access what's behind them. And I'm just going to Command A to select everything. And then open my transparency window. If yours isn't showing, remember you can get it under Window. And just drag my transparency down to the point where I can see my drawing underneath. Okay, and then the other thing I want to do, now I have my sketch locked, but I'm going to pull this down arrow and I'm going to lock all of these other objects that I've already created because I don't want to alter them at this point. All right, so I'm still working on my logo layer. And I'm going to be using the pen tool. And I'm just going to create a shape so that I can get this cutout happening. And you can see that I've already altered my design from what I originally sketched. So it is slightly altered, so I'll keep that in mind as I'm working, and that's okay to do that. So I just need to remember that I have this a little bit smaller up here, and then my fire's a little bit smaller, so I need to keep that in mind. Okay, now since this is a shape that I am cutting away from my original shape, I just went loosely around the outside, and it's okay to do that. And so now I'm going to go back in and unlock the green shape that I'm cutting away from. And then I'm going to grab both my new blue shape that I made and holding Shift my green shape. And I'm going to open up my Pathfinder and use the second one, which is minus front. And you can see that that just took that away. Okay, now one thing I noticed when I did that is that this hadn't come all the way up and around as high as the shape that I had. Let me turn my sketch off so I'm not confused by that, and I do have some cleanup, so I'll work on that. Okay, now that I have those shapes looking smooth and I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and add some of these other shapes that I have here. Okay, now that I have all my pieces, I'm going to go ahead and create some gradients for this, and I'll start with the blue. Holding Shift, I'm going to select all my blue pieces, and I'm going to go to over here on my fill and my stroke panel. I'm going to go to the center option here, which is gradient. And so for the blue, I've already pre-selected a radial gradient. And I'm going to go to my first node And I need to make sure I'm on RGB color. And for the first node, I already have selected my values here. So for the R is 19, the G is 214, and for the B, I have 234. And on the second node, again, switch to RGB color. And I have 0, 77, and 170. Okay. And for the green, let me get off of the blue. I'm going to grab all of my green colors. I'm going to add a gradient to this as well. So click on the center icon there, the gradient. And for the gradient, I'm using a linear gradient for the green. And for the first node, I'm in CMYK, and I want to be in RGB because those are the values I have. So I'm just going to switch that. And I have for R 31, my G is 209, and my B 17. And then second node, again, I'm in CMYK, so I'm switching to RGB. I have 0, 127, and 50. Okay, so those are my colors for my gradients. And with logos, you'll notice I want you to start looking at a lot of famous logos. Sometimes they do have gradients, sometimes they don't, but gradients are something that you have an option to use. And if it works for your particular logo, then I'd say go ahead and use it. But you don't have to use it, so don't feel like you're forced to use it. And then the last thing I'm going to put is a shadow on this. And I also want you to look at a lot of famous logos and check and see, do they have a shadow? Sometimes they do, a lot of times they do, and a lot of times they don't. So it really, again, just depends on your logo. And I'm going to add a new layer for this, and I'm moving it underneath my logo, and I'll call this shadow. And you do this a lot the same way you do in Photoshop. So first of all, I'm going to start with black for my fill color. Okay, and using the ellipse tool, since I have a ball basically, I'm going to just create a shadow underneath this that would take the shape of a really elongated oval. All right, and I want to change the opacity of that to soften it up. And Illustrator also has a blur effect. So if I go to Effect, Blur, Gaussian Blur, I want to preview this. And I'm just going to move this around so that it looks like a shadow, not too intense, and say OK. And it still looks a little floaty to me. Some logos, by the way, they look floaty on purpose, like they're floating in the air and the shadow is cast below them. So I could keep it this way. Or if I wanted to ground this a little bit more, I could just put another smaller oval within this oval and just make it a little bit more intense. So I'm applying the same effects, but not quite as strong. Maybe a little bit less on that blur. Something like that. And you can see that that helped to ground the shape. Okay, and one thing I'm noticing is that my green gradient did not get applied to my little fire shape down here. And there's a really easy way to address that. So what I want to do is I want to copy this green gradient. So going to my selection tool, I'm going to grab my big green shape that has the gradient, and I'm going up to my tool options panel. And under the gradient, I'm just going to hit New Swatch here. And you can call this whatever you want. It says New Gradient Swatch. I'll call it Green Gradient. And so now I have that saved, and so it'll be really easy. I'm going to get off of that and go to my little fire shape here. And then all I need to do is pull that swatch down, and there's my green gradient swatch, and click on that and it'll automatically apply. So that makes it really easy. So if you do find that you missed something and you want to apply the same gradient or color or whatever, you can always add a new swatch right there. The last thing I'm going to add is a shine to this to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. And again, this was going to be an optional step. And I'm going to do this with the ellipse tool. So I'm going to just create an ellipse. And I'm going to move it over to this side. And maybe increase its size slightly. Okay, and I want to apply a new gradient to this, but I want this to be white to black. This is going to be a linear gradient, and I want to put the angle, I want to play with this angle a little bit so that it just looks right with my shape. So I want the black more down along the bottom here and the white up at the top. So about -50 looks good. Okay, then I'm going over to transparency, and I'm going to turn the transparency way down. This should be very, very subtle. Somewhere between 15 and 20, I think, 17, something like that. Okay, and that just adds a little bit of shine. You can also go up to Effect, Blur, and blur this out a little bit. If it's a little bit too strong, let's say you like it, but it's just a little bit too much, you can go ahead and blur that out a little bit. And that looks really nice. It just gives it a little bit of a 3D touch. Okay, so I am happy with my logo. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to submit this, and I'm submitting it as a .ai file, an Illustrator file. And for our next module, we're going to be using our logo to create a business card, a letterhead, and an envelope.